Our next speaker is Dr. Chris Venner. He's an hematologist and assistant professor in medical oncology at the Cross Cancer Institute in Edmonton. Dr. Venner is also chair of the Myeloma Canada Research Network for the National Myeloma Patient Database. He will introduce us to the National Database Initiative and explain its importance in helping make treatment decisions and optimizing patient outcomes. This presentation will be in English. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, and I have to thank the organizers too for inviting me to come and talk to you guys. This talk today is going to really be an introduction. This is a really important initiative that we've been able to get off the ground. It's a long time coming, but it is something that we finally have enough interest and support at the national level that we can take it forward. So I'll really just introduce what we hope to accomplish, and then hopefully in a year or two, or maybe even on a yearly basis, I'd be able to come back and talk to you about the things that we will be able to do and have done. So these are my disclosures. And just by way of sort of a backdrop, I guess, rather than a formal outline for my talk, one of the things that really drove our decision to take this initiative forward is that we really in Canada don't have a great handle on what truly is a Canadian myeloma patient. A lot of the interest and research at the international level is obviously important to advancing the field, but not always readily applicable to the patient sitting in front of us at any given time. And that's because there's nuances to how we have to treat the disease in our country, and not even just within the country at large, but also nuances to how we treat it within the individual provinces. So the other component of that is in Canada, we still don't have a really great way of analyzing truly how applicable some of these more recent advancements in therapy are for our patients. Even though we start to introduce a lot of these new and, as you've already heard from some of the other talks, very expensive drugs, we don't have a way to continually go back and assess to see if this has had an impact for our patients. And so those are the main things that have kind of driven our desire, I guess, to have a sort of Canadian-made database data set that we can start to ask and hopefully answer some of these questions. So as far as who we're treating, this is who we think we're treating these days. This is a little bit more Alberta-centric, but I think still in this day and age applicable to pretty much every patient across the country. We try and transplant patients in whom that is the right choice. For those that do get a transplant, as you've already heard, most of our patients get bortezomib-based induction treatment. Cybord-D is the classic triplet that we tend to use. We use melphalan as our stem cell transplant-based regimen. Depending on where you live, you may or may not get some consolidation, but nowadays pretty much everybody gets lenalidomide maintenance, and that's the pretty standard upfront approach. Lenalidomide maintenance has not been around for that long in our country, though, and we actually really don't have any idea as to how that's really impacted our patients as yet, and it's something that we hope to be able to answer. For those folks that aren't transplant eligible, again, still a bortezomib-based induction, possibly some continuous or maintenance type treatment until progression would be the way that we would generally go. And then in the orange box there's the treatment of relapse disease, and that's always been a bit of a dog's breakfast, as my colleague Donna Reese from PMH likes to say. And it is, truly. I mean, that's, as many of you in the room will know, relapse disease is not relapse disease. I mean, there's all kinds of ways this entity can return. How we treat it depends on what you might have had before, how old you are, what other medical baggage, so to speak, that you carry with you. So it becomes a really difficult thing to establish a standard for, but still something that we would like to have some guidance as to informing how we go about it. And just going back, so this is how we tend to treat the disease now. And as you probably gather from the array of all of the new drugs that are coming down the pipe, it's going to get even more complicated. So this is a slide that just shows some of the results from the recent phase 3 data. So all the agents tested in these trials are coming our way fairly rapidly, even in Canada. So there'll probably be about 5 new drugs over the next few years that will hopefully we'll have funded and have access to within Canada. The first 2 trials there, the Aspire and the Endeavour trial, are the ones that set the stage for a drug called carfilzomib. Some of you in the room may be very familiar with this drug. The Tourmaline study is an oral proteasome inhibitor, so basically an oral version of ixazomib. So that sort of sets the stage for that drug. The Eloquent trial was the first big phase 3 study for an antibody-based treatment in myeloma, which is one of those holy grail type mechanisms of action that we haven't not yet been able to play around with in this disease. And then the Panorama study is a class of drugs, or the main drug there is a drug called panabinostat. So all these are phase 3. These are sort of all poised in front of our various regulatory bodies in Canada, Health Canada, and the P-coder system. So these drugs are going to soon be in our hands, and hopefully we will have a better way to assess the impact of the introduction of these drugs as they come through. And this will be really important, not just for showing efficacy, but also to justify the cost. If you combine, as they did in the Aspire study there, carfilzomib, Revlimid, and dexamethasone, arguably that could cost over $100,000 per patient per year. If people do as well as we hope they would do based on the trial, that's a very costly investment. But if you're that patient, you think that it was very much worth it. So we want to be able to track that in more of a real world setting. And I'm not going to go through this slide in great detail, but this is just to show the wave of the future too. So this is breaking down all of the different ways that we have to address the myeloma cell. All of these different pathways have specific drugs that are now in development for them. A number of them are well on their way to very routine clinical use, including another antibody drug that you've probably heard a lot about, daratumumab. So all of these drugs are coming our way, and we will want to use them in various permutations and combinations, and need to have a bit of an approach for assessing how that will go. Oh, there's my drum roll.
You have to dance now.
That's right. It's a river dance. So with that as the backdrop, again, what we wanted to do at the national level is to create, I guess, a platform and a forum for starting this. Myeloma Canada, being the primary patient group, has graciously put a lot of effort into uniting all of us researchers and clinicians. And so through Myeloma Canada, we've developed what's called the Myeloma Canada Research Network, really with great efforts by members of Myeloma Canada like Aldo Del Cal. He's, over the last good number of years, has been able to help organize a national meeting that brings all of us together. And over the years, what was discussed a lot is trying to develop a national framework for collecting patient data. And to be honest, I think it's actually rather interesting that we don't have this as yet. You'd think that we do a lot of collecting of our electronic health records and things, but there's no good way for us to or get all that data together in one place. So what we really wanted to do is to sit down and establish a tool to assess the quality of our current practices, and also to aid in the future clinical research questions. We wanted to be able to do this at the local level, because there's lots of nuances to how we treat things within our own provinces, but also to be able to compare and contrast nationally. We can take advantage of the centralized care model that we have in Canada. This is something that's rather unique, certainly unique in comparison to our American colleagues, where patients will travel to many different hospitals through their myeloma career for therapy. In Canada, like it or not, I guess, if you have myeloma, you pretty much only go to one center, and certainly that's the case in Alberta. If you're Red Deer North, you would come to see myself or one of 2 other doctors at the Cross Cancer Institute, and if you're Red Deer or South in Alberta, you would go to Dr. Neri and colleagues there. And we would be looking after you from start to finish. So the data that we collect on you and your blood work and things is something that we can get a really good snapshot of the whole process. The other thing that we do have in Canada, which is probably not celebrated enough, is tremendous basic science and translational programs. And these types of real-world databases really help correlate the clinical outcomes for the patients on whom we have samples on to the scientific advancements that we use or we've discovered from those patient samples. And then lastly, what we would hope to achieve with this database is to help foster multi-institutional collaboration within our country, but then also to inform some of the international level data sets that are out there. And I can tell you that there is a lot of interest in the capabilities of what Canada could and should be doing from our international colleagues. So the why questions are fairly easy to pose. Those are the pie in the sky questions, but the harder piece is the how. So this has been the biggest challenge. What we need to do is have a platform that's very user-friendly, very easy to enter data. It has to be something that we can do uniformly across the country. We have to be able to log a lot of the retrospective patient data that we have, and in myeloma that's huge. I mean, as you guys know, you get the vampires after you once a month and getting blood work. There's a lot of that data that's out there for us to grab and to try and incorporate. And then we also want to be able to use that platform to collect data prospectively. So from this point forward, can we use that as a tool, a better tool to follow how patients do and still be applicable across all the different provincial healthcare systems? So sort of to hone in, and I won't go through each one of these points, but this slide is just sort of emphasizing in a more specific fashion what we hope to really accomplish with this Canadian multiple myeloma database project. But again, really what we hope to do is to refine, I guess, the therapies that we have and the outcomes for patients across the country. The database has to be simple, and I think that's really crucial. It has to be something that is very, very easy to use and something that we can engage our data managers to use in a way that is fairly uniform. It has to be secure, and this is a really important component of getting this approved and has been a major hurdle for us as well. It has to go through all of the rigor of a research ethics board. It has to do that at least every provincial level, and depending on how your province is set up, even at every institutional level. So there's a lot of hurdles that way. But it is important. I mean, this is individual patient data that is somewhat sensitive. So we want to be able to ensure to patients when they allow us to use their data that it will be treated with great respect. It has to be data that's easy to use and easy to export. It's not just enough to collect the data, but we have to be committed to using it at the end of the day. That's where a lot of these big database projects have failed in the past, is they become big money pits for chucking a whole bunch of data in, but then nobody really wants to do anything with the data to bring it out. So we need to do that in a way that's easy to use and easy to share as well. And that's to the next point. It has to be usable by multiple sites. It also has to be mergeable, and by that I mean it needs to be something that we can use to partner with some of the other database and research initiatives that are out there. So us in Alberta, we have a growing database that we've been able to get off the ground over the last few years. Our colleagues at the Princess Margaret Hospital have been very successfully collecting patient data for a number of years and have had some really interesting publications from that, as have our colleagues in Ottawa. So we don't want to supplant the efforts that those guys have put in over the years, but be able to use it in a way that we can capitalize on that existing infrastructure. And then again, it has to be linked with local data management. We don't want one sort of individual site taking control of the entire nation. That would be foolish. I think it would be impossible. So what we hope to be able to do is develop program that's run at a national level but supports local data infrastructure that makes it relevant to the patients and again, patients in front of us at any given time. So we talked about this a lot at the Myeloma Canada Research Network. We talked about it individually and had all kinds of grand plans, but it took this one particular project to kind of galvanize this. Dr. Rees, about, I guess, a year and a half, almost maybe even 2 years ago, decided to apply for what's called a SPORE grant, and SPORE stands for Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. Interestingly enough, this is not a granting competition that's directed towards oncology. It's actually an organization that focuses more on chronic disease, but as a token to the success of myeloma therapy over the last while, we would now view it as a disease that is a sort of a chronic disease. So our goal was to develop this very large infrastructure grant through the SPORE system to see if we could be successful there. The grant, if we would have been successful, and sadly we were not, but it would have been a $25 million grant. But the way that it was set up was to have, we had to, by ourselves, raise half of that, and then the SPORE organization, when in kind, would match those funds. So despite the fact that we were not successful, a lot of the money and the goodwill that we generated in the exercise of putting the grant together stuck with us. And so we still have a substantial amount of funding present that allows us to at least launch this thing off the ground. So it still was a very, very important exercise for us to do. And importantly, the database was only one component of that grant. It did actually bring in a whole bunch of other basic science and translational pieces, as well as funding for the clinical trials network. So it really was, again, an important exercise for us as an organization to go through. Focusing on the database piece, we had 10 and have 10 sites that are very keen to commit right out of the gate. And of course, there's lots of interest from all of the other sites that aren't on this particular list as yet. And as time goes on, we hope to rope everybody in. It was an important exercise for us because it also helped set up the governance of this. As you can imagine, this is a rather complicated thing, and setting up an official structure for the rolling out of the project and also overseeing it over time was really important. If this is going to be successful, it has to be a project that we're committed to over the next number of decades. This isn't something that we're going to do just for 5 years and then leave it. We want to be able to follow patients for the entirety of their myeloma career, so to speak. And if we're doing a good job as doctors, that should stretch a good long ways. So, and then the other component of the steering committee is that we wanted to make sure that what we were doing, or what we felt was relevant as the researchers, was still relevant to the patient community, to the payers, to the folks that actually hold the purse strings for our drugs, and even to some of our other partners in industry, to make sure that we're asking the right questions and also give them an opportunity to ask questions to us. So a key component of that steering committee is membership from the Myeloma Canada level to represent the patient's side of things. There's an operations committee. I won't get into that. That's sort of boring administrative level detail, but just for you guys to know that we have gone into that boring level of detail. But again, because it's important, it's we want this to be fairly watertight. And then to ensure that we have good representation from across the country, from the Maritimes all the way out to British Columbia. We won't have every single center, but I think if we have enough people around and enough patient data entered, it will be very representative of outcomes and treatment in Canada. Another real key initiative to getting this off the ground is an initiative that hopefully we will be successful in, and so far it looks like we will. My colleague out east, Dr. Tony Ryman, who's actually Edmonton alumni as well, decided to put in an application for a Terry Fox Research Institute grant. Again, very similar to what we put together with the SPORE grant, but this one focused more on minimal residual disease testing and disease biology over time. The database is a key component of that because we're going to use patient samples. And this is, hopefully if we get it, will be a $5 million grant to look at a large cohort of newly diagnosed patients. But with that money, hopefully that will help further things along. And it will pin us down as well. That's a project that has a few more well-defined endpoints, so that it gives us some very defined deliverables. But I guess with the infrastructure that we'll have with that, it will set us up for beyond the 5 years that grant is for. So. And this is just to exemplify all of the people, all of the researchers that have participated in this. It really is a great representation across all of the sites in this country. So just as far as the platform that we have, I won't get into this in great detail because it's not terribly interesting unless you're a database nerd like myself. But there's some important features here. So the platform that we have kind of settled on for the national level database is something called eCancer Care. This is a platform that was developed in-house at Princess Margaret Hospital. So they have some infrastructure already in place there. Thank you. That will help get this off the ground. There's precedent set for using it at the local level. So the myeloma group at Princess Margaret Hospital has already been using this for a number of years. And in the renal cancer, kidney cancer group there, they've actually launched another national level database using this exact platform already. So many of the hurdles that we anticipated we would face have already been jumped over by our kidney cancer colleagues. So we'll learn a lot from them. One of the key features is that it's web-based. So it negates the need for us to sort of, fill out a database at individual sites and then have to figure out a way to get all that data, say from Edmonton back to Toronto. Everything just goes up on the cloud, but it is all very secure, all password protected. I would never know who, at the individual level, all the patients that are in Toronto and vice versa, they would never know our patients in Edmonton other than the de-identified data. It still allows each individual site to regain total control of their own patients that they enter and to use that data as they see fit at the more local level. It is a way that also can capture all the important baseline information that we need and then also the follow-up data. And again, as we pointed out earlier, this is a huge data set. So, but the platform will allow for all of this. The other real important piece, and I give full credit to our Princess Margaret colleagues for setting this up, is that, as I said before, they do have the infrastructure for overseeing the data integrity. So despite the fact that we will have local data managers entering the patient level data, there's still some oversight at the national level, which will be very, very important. And so this is just some screenshots of the kinds of things that we'll be able to capture. Anybody in the room that hasn't ever done any database work knows that if you put bad data in, you get bad data out. And I guess that's a very PC way of saying that statement, but it is important to capture all of those things. And the other nice thing about the platform is that it is very malleable. If there's new data points that we feel are important, we can easily add those and go back retrospectively and update the data. So it's a very user-friendly system that way. And as I said, there is a way for us to capture things over time as well. It's not just going to be an individual snapshot of a patient, but rather it will reflect an individual patient's journey. That's the eCancer Care platform. I'll just briefly show you what we've been able to develop in Alberta because we'll use these two concurrently. What we settle on in Alberta, at least for the time being, is Microsoft Access, which is that program that we all have on our desktop. If you have an Microsoft Office suite, and it's the one that nobody knows why they have it on their desktop, but this is why. So again, very easy to use, very easy to manipulate and add or subtract fields as time goes on. We've taken a bit of a broader swath of the plasma cell diseases, and that's because of my interest in amyloidosis as well. So we're trying to grab as much information on our patients as possible. We've used this database to help our translational initiatives in Edmonton as well. As many of you know, my colleagues Dr. Belch and Dr. Pilarski have been working tirelessly for the last good number of decades and already have a huge repository of patient information. So this is to take that to the next level. So I'll just kind of go through this very quickly. Again, just snapshots of what we have. This type of data, though, is actually very, very important, and it is stuff that many people are interested in knowing about. People are interested at the national level because it does allow us, again, to get a snapshot of how our patients are doing, and it does inform things at an international level as well, because people and our American colleagues or European colleagues are very curious as to how well we do in Canada. This data is based on our Alberta patients, but this is the type of thing we would like to do at the national level. This was some stuff that we presented at ASH this year, and really just it's very simple kind of outcomes, but reflects the real-world patient journey that our patients go through. And the question that we had was very simple, which was simply how well do patients do after each line of therapy? And one of the things that was quite striking is that the best time that patients have and where we have made the biggest gains in this disease are after the first 2 lines of treatment. That seems to be, and that kind of makes sense actually. I mean, that's when the disease is at its probably genetically weakest, as what Dr. Neri had pointed out before, less complex to treat. But what is a little bit disheartening is after 3rd, 4th, and 5th line therapies, the expected duration of disease control is fairly short, and so that is a bit humbling to see. And it also it reflects the other big challenge we have for those patients that are double exposed, and by that I mean patients that have seen both the active class of proteasome inhibitors like Velcade and the immunomodulatory drugs like lenalidomide. So those patients, once you've seen both those agents, they do worse after they relapse. So it reflects that there really is this big cohort of patients that we still need to do a lot of work on. And then one of the other pieces that we were able to inform, I guess, was looking at the use of Cyborg-D in our transplant-ineligible folks. And despite the fact that that has been widely adopted across the country as the quote-unquote standard of care, there's really no clinical trial that's ever informed that. And so we're kind of dependent on database initiatives to establish what would be the expected outcomes there. And again, this is Alberta data. But it does show that with that Cyborg-D regimen, we do pretty well with greater than VGPR rates of about 40% or more, which is quite important. And that these are the outcomes that we would see depending on your response. So it kind of establishes it as at least equivalent to some of the other well-established international standards that are out there, but still quite clearly shows that we need to do better. So as far as the next steps, what we need to do is now establish the infrastructure at each site. We've established consensus on the eCancer Care platform for the national data set, so that bit is done. And now we're in the process of actively submitting this whole initiative through each of the local research ethics boards for formal approval. This is going to take a bit of time. This is where we have to duke it out at the provincial level, but again, there is already precedent set from our kidney cancer colleagues, so hopefully it won't be a huge battle. And then we want to establish some timelines for uploading all of the legacy data that many of the key sites have, and then also timelines for uploading the prospective data as well. And our focus is to go back to about 2008. That's when a lot of the novel agents really came into play, so that'll be probably the most informative era. We do have, many of us, our centers have information that goes back well beyond that as well, and perhaps with time we'll be able to input that, but this will be the focus for the immediate future. And then hopefully starting in January of next year, we'll begin to be able to start uploading all the new cases in a more prospective fashion. And then the last point is the most important one, and this is very much a work in progress, but that's developing a plan for financial stability of this initiative over the long run. And we've been really trying to hone in at the MCRN level as to what our baseline level of infrastructure will be and budget will be to keep this thing going as a sort of a cornerstone to that whole research program. So with that, I'll close. I'll just say thank you very much to you guys as the patients. Thank you very much to Myeloma Canada for supporting this, and I hope to come back and give you some real nice data in a couple of years. So thank you again. And I'll just say one other thing. I won't be able to attend the question and answer period later, but if any of you folks are interested in knowing a little bit more about the initiative, just track me down through Aldo or anybody at Myeloma Canada. I'm happy to touch base over the phone or via email, so they know how to reach me. Thank you again.